Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, or good morning, whenever you happen to be watching this. But welcome to our AllCardinals Podcast. I'm Howard Balzer. Alex Weiner is here, Millard Thomas. And here we are with two preseason games finished for the Cardinals, one to go, and just a few weeks until the regular season opens. And before we get into the game against Kansas City or looking ahead to New Orleans, I will say this, guys, that the best thing about talking right now is that there's two games in the books and there's only one more of these preseason games to go. That to me is the best, because sometimes you have to watch these games, but a lot of times you wish you didn't have to.
Yeah, I feel like that was a sentiment throughout the press box this week, especially. That was a bit of a tough game to get through. But yeah, only one more, and then there's an off week, and then finally they play the Tennessee Titans to start things off.
Yeah, I'm just ready for the regular season, man. Preseason, I'm not a huge fan of it. It's a lot of vanilla offenses in the preseason, not seeing too many starters out here. So I'm definitely ready for that regular season matchup against the Titans.
Well, you guys know that I've been doing this for a long time. And I've always had a saying that because there's such a long period of time before the end of one season and the start of the next season, the longest off season in professional sports, that we all say, oh, can't wait for the preseason games to get here. Can't wait for it. And as soon as the first game starts, you're going, after about 5 minutes, all right, I'm done with this. Let's get to the regular season. And of course, the one thing I have to say that I didn't miss in the years I wasn't covering a team until coming to Arizona is I didn't have to watch preseason games, but now we do. The players have to play them. The coaches have to coach them. But we also know that there's such a combination of players that are on the field and aren't, that there's really no flow to these games. And quite frankly, I'm not sure how coaches really make true evaluations of what happens, because you always have to look at, okay, that player looked good, but who was he playing against? Was it ones against twos? Was it twos against threes? Was it threes against threes? The one thing we know is when these games are decided a lot of times in the fourth quarter, a lot of the guys that are on the field then won't be around when week one is played for the Cardinals on September 12th.
Yeah, I mean, just listen to Cliff Kingsbury a lot during this preseason. He just keeps saying, I don't want to show my hand. I'm not trying to show too much. So maybe some of the angst that's going against this Cardinals offense in the preseason, we could just chalk it up to Cliff is not trying to do too much. He's been consistent saying he's not trying to show a lot in this preseason. So maybe that's part of the reason why the Cardinals offense hasn't taken off like a lot of people want. A lot of people want at least that one impressive drive like we've seen from a few teams this preseason. Really haven't seen it from the Cardinals, but maybe just Cliff being super conservative like a lot of these coaches.
Yeah, although I do think with the bottom of the roster guys, these games, it sort of matters more to them. It's sort of like how I would look at the NBA Summer League in a sense, where you get all like your rookies, you get some guys trying to make the roster, you get them out there, and they may not be running the same exact, stuff that they would in the regular season. They may not be going up against guys who represent the difficulty of players that they play in the regular season, but still it's sort of a look as to what they could look like in a league beyond the college football seasons. So I feel like in that sense, it could be pretty positive, but absolutely. I mean, when we see the starters out there and they're running, very basic plays and, the starters are kind of out of sync because one starter is in, one is not, and they're going up against defense where a few starters are in, a few are not, it could be a bit jumbled. So it's kind of hard to evaluate, but I do think there is a little bit of value there when it comes to the guys who are trying to make the roster and then the rookies trying to get their feet wet a little bit.
The one thing we do know is that there will be a 16-player practice squad again this season. So a lot of those bottom of the roster decisions, well, if it's whatever position it might be at, and most of the time it comes down to special teams, but if it's between a couple, 2-3 guys at a bunch of positions, the reality is most of those guys that don't make the 53, at least to start out, will be on the practice squad. So they will still have the opportunity to practice and be with the team. And especially for rookies, that's important as you get into that regular season routine. So, and those moves, just so everybody knows, on Tuesday, there will be a cut to 80 players. And then the next Tuesday is the big day, August 31st, when all rosters around the league will cut to 53, and then teams will start adding to that practice squad. So that's when we'll see some trades. We'll see some names that maybe are unexpected that'll show up on those lists, and makes for a very long days when that roster is cut. But let's go back to this game against Kansas City just a little bit, and you guys alluded to it with the choppy offense and fans hoping, we wish we had seen more from the offense with Kyler Murray when they had 3 and outs, ran 9 plays for a total, and you put the word total in quotes, -1 yard.
Yeah.
And people are, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Well, of course, you always have to remember that Justin Pugh wasn't at left guard. Josh Jones, who maybe will win the right guard job, but I think everyone figured going into camp was going to be either Justin Murray or Brian Winters. He was at right guard. DeAndre Hopkins wasn't on the field. And the other thing, guys, is that there will be 3 and outs during the regular season, and there will be games where you get off to a slow start. But you also know you're still going to be out there, and you can come out of that and start playing better football and develop some continuity and a flow to the game. But when you leave after those 3 and outs, well, there's no chance to come back from it. And it's also what makes the preseason so difficult to evaluate, because it's so many changing faces on the field that you don't have an opportunity to really get any continuity in your offense or your defense for that matter.
Yeah, and I think to start with just the starting offense that we saw out there, I think out of sync was the right way to sort of evaluate how they looked. I mean, and just every other play, it seemed like there was some sort of either miscommunication or player not really being on the same page as somebody else. I had a fake handoff to James Conner that he thought he was getting the ball, that kind of slowly developed and forced Kyler Murray to escape the pocket and scramble out to the right. Obviously with Rondale Moore and the little route over the middle and the flat, Rondale sat in the zone. Kyler Murray thought he would still keep going. And then with AJ Green, that looked like a bit of a not being on the same page sort of situation too. So it was very choppy, and it just, I don't know if necessarily just because like players are shuffling in and out, because those are, 3 players with Kyler Murray who are brand new to this team. And that was sort of their first go at it. And that was really their only go at it with Murray. So you're right. Just because of the nature of the preseason, they didn't really get a chance to kind of get their, feet underneath them with him in this offense. So against a different opponent. So I'm curious just how, if they want to try that again next week, or they're just going to say, you know what, it didn't look great. We want to keep our guys healthy for the regular season. We're just going to take next one off and then be as ready as possible for Tennessee.
Yeah, it seems like early indications they're gonna probably rest their guys in week 3. But I think a lot of angst surrounding this game is that it was choppy, and you didn't get to see that one great drive. I mean, the Cardinals defense was doing a great job at bending and not breaking against the Chiefs offense, but still, at least you got to see the Chiefs offense go for 15 plays and move the ball down the field. The Cardinals offense just went 3 and out every time. And so I think a lot of people just felt like it was still the same problems that we've seen during the regular season with the Cardinals offense. Still in the preseason, they felt like, in the preseason, you can at least get at least one easy drive in there. Even a guy like Trey Lance was able to get one good drive in his preseason debut. So I think for a lot of people, it's still frustrating. It still felt like the same problems you have with a Cliff Kingsbury offense. But on the bright side for fantasy owners, Rondale Moore seems to be a guy you have to keep on your watch. I mean, he was targeted a few times. He was even rushed the ball one time, I believe, too. So this dude is going to be used in a myriad of ways. And he's tinier. He's got a small frame at 5'7", but with the kind of speed he has, he can still take the top off of defenses.
I'm glad you brought up Rondale Moore, because the next question I was going to ask you guys is, who has caught your eye, not only in the game against Kansas City, but in these first two games, whether it's a rookie, whether it's a newcomer. Of course, a bunch of the newcomers in terms of veterans haven't been able to get on the field for very much time yet. But who has caught your eye and that we should all keep an eye on? I'll chime in with mine when you guys are done, whether it's on offense or defense.
Yeah, Moore is a great pick. I think especially in that first game too, even over that second game. In that first game, I mean, he was running like 5 very different plays that all went for, pretty decent gains, whether it was a screen, whether he was running out on a bootleg, whether it was the reverse with the jet sweep. I mean, they obviously want to use him in a lot of different ways, and I think that's going to be really exciting. I'm curious just how much they'll use him early in the season, if it's going to start a little bit slower and then they'll sort of work into it, or just from the get-go they'll be able to sort of use him as that spark plug. I think that's probably the smarter move, especially against teams who may not be accustomed to them doing something like that. But another guy who has really stood out to me during this preseason so far. I mean, this last game, Byron Murphy, I thought was awesome in coverage, and not just with the interception, which was a terrific play and really good smarts from him. Maybe not a play he makes a couple of years ago when he was a rookie, but now he knows he follows Patrick Mahomes when Mahomes is drifting off to the sideline and is right there to take away any sort of route Mahomes' ball has to his receiver. But also just watching the tape back and watching him in coverage, whether he was on the inside or the outside. And the team has said pretty much all offseason that they like him both as an outside corner and in the slot. And he was primarily in the slot last year, but that versatility gives them the option to maybe put Marco Wilson more so in the slot, another guy who played very well in week 1 of the preseason. So Byron Murphy stands out to me for sure, and he's sort of elevating to what they hopefully need as something close to the cornerback 1.
Yeah, that toe tap drag by Byron Murphy in the back of the end zone to pick off Mahomes was pretty nasty. But being an ASU guy, I think I'm going to have to ride with Eno Benjamin on this one. I've loved the way he looked in preseason so far. He had a 38-yard run. That first game, five rushes for 50 yards. He had another 18 yards on 3 carries this game. He looks a little bit lighter to me. Seems like they're using him more in special teams too as a returner. So I'm liking his prospects for next season. He's still trying to win that third running back job, so he's not going to be a guy we see on the field a ton to start the year. But considering James Conner's injury history and Chase Edmonds is not a super huge guy, this could be a season where one guy goes down. Eno Benjamin could have a potential for a large workload in this offense, and just another guy that maybe you should keep your eye on in fantasy.
Yeah, and to go back to the special teams point, I think that is sort of his key to making it onto the field early on, because I didn't really expect him to be returning kicks as much as he has been in these games, and he's looked pretty solid as a return man. And not only that, though, but also he's been in coverage situations too with special teams. So the fact that they're getting him out there and giving him looks, I think is a great sign.
Yeah, 2 for 35 on kick returns in this last game. Really crazy stuff by him.
Yeah, I think the coverage is probably going to be the ticket to being on the roster, because any kick return stuff that he can add will be great. But I think we all expect Rondale Moore to be out there most of the time. And so if you're going to be not only on the roster, but key is he was on the roster last year, but he just was never active. The key to being active is to be on as many special teams units as possible. And that's where the Cardinals are looking for a guy, especially on punt coverage, at that gunner spot to replace Trent Sherfield, who moved on in the offseason of the 49ers. So that's going to be crucial in some of these guys making the roster. I'm going to pick a couple guys that are way under the radar, and I'm not sure they're going to make the team. One of them, I think, has a pretty good path to it, although there's a lot of other pretty good players ahead of him on the depth chart. And that guy is the 6th-round pick, the outside linebacker, Victor Dimukeje, because he's played a ton of snaps in these first 2 games. And normally, a guy like that, who you're not sure about, you certainly want to get him some snaps, but if you want to try to sneak him through to the practice squad, you probably don't want to play him too much, because if you play him a bunch, other teams are going to see him. And there would be a chance for a team that doesn't have that depth at outside linebacker to potentially claim him on waivers, because to get a guy in the practice squad, he has to go through waivers first. And when we look at Cardinals at outside linebacker, I mean, what the heck? They have Chandler Jones. I hope I don't forget anybody. Chandler Jones, Devon Kennard, Dennis Gardeck, if he gets back from PUP, and maybe that'll be a key. We don't know if he's going to be ready yet for the start of the season. And if he stays on physically unable to perform, he can't come back until after the 6th week of the season. And then you still throw in Marcus Golden. And so they've got some depth there at that outside linebacker spot. But I like what I've seen from him. He had a lot of snaps again against the Chiefs, not only on defense, but on special teams. And it seems to me he's edging towards making the roster. A guy that probably won't make it, but I think could be a candidate for the practice squad. How many wide receivers is this team going to keep? I think they all pretty much know it's the top 4 who those are, with Hopkins, Green, Kirk, and Moore. But then it comes down to 5 and 6, if 6 are made. You have Keyshawn Johnson. You have Andy Isabella. What happens when he comes back from the COVID list? Is he in danger of not making the roster? And then you've got a bunch of guys who have shown some good things in training camp, like Antoine Wesley, almost had a great catch in the game Friday night. They ruled it a catch, but then overturned it. You've had some other guys played well, but the one guy who just seems to make plays whenever he's out there is Greg Dortch. And no one even knew who he was until the Cardinals added him to the roster after training camp had started. But he's made plays in both games. So I don't know that it's hard for me to imagine he'll make the roster, but I would certainly expect that he could very well be on the practice squad. But they've got some pretty good depth here, and a tight end also. The guy who had the touchdown on Friday night, Ross Travis, he's bounced around the league a little bit, but has made plays with other teams, and it could come down to a third or fourth tight end between him and Demetrius Harris, who the Cardinals just signed a couple weeks ago. So those are a couple guys that I have my eye on as we get close to this cut down to 53 players. So we talked about Kansas City a little bit. We're now heading towards the final 4 days of practice at State Farm Stadium. Camp breaks on Thursday, and then the Cardinals will travel to New Orleans to play a game on artificial turf against the Saints, the final preseason game. Cliff Kingsbury was asked Friday night if that will affect who plays in the game, and he had a one-word answer: no. But that doesn't mean he's telling us the truth either. So I'm going to be very curious who plays against the Saints and what we see from this team in the third and final preseason game of the summer.
Yeah, I don't expect to see much of Kyler Murray, if at all. I think maybe Hopkins, but we'll see. I think most of the starters are probably going to not really play or not come in the game at all for this one. That just seems to be the early indications from the Cardinals so far. But there's still some interesting battles to watch. I think maybe the most interesting battle for me personally, I'm really liking the backup quarterback battle. We know Colt McCoy has been a journeyman. He's a professional backup quarterback, but Chris Streveler has looked pretty insane in the preseason. I mean, he's been pretty nasty whenever he stepped on the field. He's probably been the best player every time he stepped on the field from a rushing perspective. He's been basically Kyler Murray in that area as well from a rushing standpoint. So this guy's been able to do it all. He's been dominant so far whenever he stepped on the field. And right now, I think I'm going to have him as that leader, as my QB2 in the quarterback room.
I think that's an upset with Streveler there. I mean, Streveler has looked great in this preseason so far. I mean, he's been coming in the second halves. He's been facing definitely not the caliber of defenses as well. McCoy hasn't faced, the starting defenses necessarily, but it's getting lower in the depth chart when Streveler comes into the game. But I was really impressed by his arm this past week. I mean, that first game, it was more so his legs, that huge run, which he trucked a defender. I mean, that was incredibly impressive. And that's something you more expect out of Chris Streveler than him hurling the ball around. But that last throw to Ross Travis to, score the only touchdown of the game for the Cardinals this past Friday was probably the best throw I've seen from Streveler, whether it be in open portions of practice or in any sort of game situation. So, Streveler's looked good. He looks improved from where he was. I mean, obviously after, he struggled in week 17 last year, that was sort of his MO. He needed to get better, and it looks like he has, but I don't know. I think they brought in Colt McCoy for a reason. And I think that, he's, the far ahead right now as far as that competition is concerned. But Streveler is making a case to keep a third quarterback on there.
Here's the thing that I wonder about. Unless you remember, they did keep three last year, even though Brett Hundley was never active. But that leads me to what I'm wondering about, because last year we heard a lot about the things that Streveler can do, whether it is like running or doing this, and even maybe playing on special teams. And we saw it early in the season when he ran a play. He ran the ball on a 3rd and short, then on another one he came in and threw. I forget exactly what the play was, and then we never saw it again for the rest of the season. The thing I wonder about is if Colt McCoy is number 2, do they not only keep Streveler, but figure out other ways to utilize him where he could potentially be active for a game? If he's going to be active, though, he has to play on special teams. And it'll be very interesting to see if maybe we see that once the regular season starts, and if they would keep, because I don't know, there's a team in the league that would keep 3 quarterbacks active for a game unless that third guy is going to contribute in some ways. So that will definitely be one thing to watch more as we get close to the regular season. As for the game against the Saints, I'm with you, Millard. I think that I don't know how much a lot of guys are going to play in terms of the starters. Certainly you'd like to see some of these guys get out there a bit for the game. And because let's remember, there's a bunch of time off. They won't be off in terms of practice, but there's time off in the past. You'd you'd have a game on the Thursday, usually of the final week of preseason, and then you'd be playing 10 days later. Well, now this game on Saturday will be the last on-field action in a game for a full 2 weeks and a day. And so I'm wondering if they'll decide to give some guys a little more time just to hopefully be sharp when the regular season rolls around against Tennessee on September 12th. So we'll be speculating about it all week, and of course writing stories and all those things here at All Cardinals. But I'll just give you guys any last thoughts that you have before we close this All Cardinals podcast for the day.
Yeah, I guess a closing thought would be I'm intrigued to watch Andy Isabella coming back, because I think that he just because he hasn't been on the field, that receiver spot on the roster is slipping away a little bit just because of how good Keyshawn Johnson has looked. And you mentioned Antoine Wesley and Greg Dortch playing well. So I'm curious how he comes back and how he adjusts after being on the COVID list.
Yeah, Andy Isabella, it looks like he's definitely moving down in the depth chart. I'm scared for him and his NFL career. He still could have a future with the Cardinals, but it seems like Rondale Moore is quickly surpassing him in the depth chart.
And let's remember, sometimes we forget that he was inactive for 3 of the last 4 games, 3 of the last season. And the only reason he was active for the final game of the season is because Larry Fitzgerald couldn't play because of a groin injury. Of course, we haven't even touched on that story, but you can read all about it on the website. It sure seems trending that he's not going to play unless something drastic happens in his mind about wanting to play. But yeah, those will be the stories that we will be watching in terms of guys coming back. Justin Pugh tested positive. He said he was vaccinated, and so that being the case, if you're unvaccinated and test positive, you have to be out 10 days. If you're vaccinated, then you can return if you have 2 negative tests back-to-back 24 hours apart. So that'll be something we'll be monitoring this week to see if, in fact, he returns to practice. We know J.J. Watt is coming back to practice. And the other thing, guys, we can make a final comment on, as I alluded earlier to Josh Jones playing right guard. Brian Winters has been out for a few weeks. Justin Murray out for not quite as long, but for quite a while. I'm wondering at what point are we going to see them back in practice to realistically getting themselves into the competition at that right guard spot. And so I'm very curious if we're going to see them on the field this week.
Yeah, I am too. And if not, I guess we have some questions for Cliff Kingsbury on when exactly their timetable is. Let's say it's probably fine.
Cliff said he won't answer.
But yeah, I mean, that's obviously a big deal, because if they're not back by the end of training camp, is this just Josh Jones' position for the time being until they can get their legs underneath them a little bit, and then the competition re-ups itself again in the first couple of weeks of the season if Jones slips a little bit. So, but right now, Josh Jones, I mean, this is his key chance to really separate himself, and he's been getting a ton of first-team reps, so that can only be really good for the youngster, and so we'll see exactly what happens with the other two.
Yeah, Kyle Murray is always ducking from that right side during the regular season. That's going to be a big indication of who's going to be leading that right guard position early in the season.
No question about that. That's Millard Thomas, Alex Weiner. I'm Howard Balzer. Thanks for tuning in for our All Cardinals podcast. We'll be doing a lot more of these during the season, so keep it right here. You can see our podcast, and, of course, go to the website for all the written and video and audio content at allcardinals.com.